Crimes of the Centuries listeners. This is Amber, and I'm checking in from vacation. I'm taking 2 weeks off. But I didn't want to leave your feed dark these 2 weeks, so I've got some things planned for while I'm gone. Today, I'm sharing an episode of The Catalyst, a monthly show from Grab Bag Collab. That's the creator collective I co-founded. The premise is simple. Each episode digs into the upbringing and backstory of someone who committed one of history's most notorious crimes. We're talking the psychological factors, the warning signs, the moments that shaped them. But you don't find out who we're talking about until the very end. This episode is called The Traveler. That's it. That's all I'm going to tell you. If you want more, and there are 50 plus episodes to catch up on, head over to grabbagcollab.com to subscribe. Enjoy. I'll be back soon. People interested in true crime are always baffled by the why. Why would someone do these things? What path in life could possibly have led them to commit such atrocious acts? In this podcast, we aim to explore the upbringings and backgrounds of some of history's worst criminals, but with a twist. Because we want you to set aside what you already know about them, we won't use their names until the end of the show so you can listen anew and hopefully get insight into the question that haunts us the most. Why did they do it? Join us as we explore The Catalyst. Sometime around 2001, somewhere in the vast wilderness between states, a young man pulled his truck off a remote logging road. In the bed of his vehicle lay ordinary construction tools, shovels, a pickaxe, weatherproof containers. To anyone passing by, he might just have been a contractor heading to a job site, or maybe a camper seeking solitude in the backcountry. But he wasn't either of those things. He hiked nearly a mile into the dense forest, carrying a heavy plastic bucket, the kind you might store paint or drywall compound in. When he found a suitable spot, isolated, unmarked, memorable only to him, he began to dig. The hole needed to be deep enough that animals wouldn't disturb it, but shallow enough that he could retrieve the contents when he returned. And he would return. That was the entire point. Inside the bucket were cash, weapons, and cleaning supplies, a carefully curated collection of items that would allow him to commit terrible acts far from home with no traceable connection to his everyday life. No paper trail or digital footprint, nothing that could link him to what he was planning. This was not an impulsive act. This was preparation, discipline. This was a man who understood that modern forensic science could connect the dots that previous generations of killers never had to worry about. DNA evidence, digital surveillance, credit card records, cell phone triangulation, all of it created a web that trapped the careless. So, he wouldn't be careless. Over the next decade, he would bury these kits across the country in forests and parks and empty lots. He would return to them years later, sometimes driving thousands of miles to retrieve a single cache before committing a crime in that region, then burying it again and driving home. He did this while he maintained his job in construction, always showing up on time and even doing quality work. He had a girlfriend and a daughter. He paid his taxes. He seemed, by all accounts, unremarkable. But he was building something. Not the houses and commercial buildings he was paid to construct, but an elaborate infrastructure of violence. A network of hidden resources that would allow him to kill without pattern, without predictability, and without the usual behavioral signatures that law enforcement relied on to build profiles. To that end, he didn't have a type or limit his hunts to familiar territory. Every decision he made flummoxed investigators. All the telltale signs they were used to flagging would prove to be missing here. He didn't kill because psychological pressure built up and demanded release. He killed when conditions were right. Every decision seemed calculated to avoid the patterns investigators relied on. No, this one turned murder into a craft, something to be planned and executed with the same methodical precision he brought to his legitimate work. And for more than a decade, it worked perfectly. Until one winter night, when he made a decision that deviated from his own carefully constructed rules, a choice driven not by planning, but by proximity and opportunity. A choice that would ultimately unravel everything. This is the story of the traveler. The traveler was born in the late 1970s in the tiny town of Cove, Utah, the second of what would become 10 children. His parents had met as teenagers in Los Angeles, both Mormons, both misfits, both uncomfortable with the modern world. His mother Heidi had been adopted and was mature beyond her years, preferring the company of adults to her peers. His father, Jeff, spent his free time fixing broken things or alone with a book. The couple married young. She was 21, he was 22, and they shared a vision: raise their children in nature, away from government interference, modern medicine, and the corrupting influence of civilization. When Heidi first walked into the woods, she thought, why would anyone live in a city? So they moved to Utah. Their first child, a girl named America, was born at home in 1976. Jeff delivered her himself. None of their children would have birth certificates or social security numbers or attend school. The government would have no say in how they were raised. But neighbors in Utah grew concerned about this strange family with toddlers who were rarely seen outside. When authorities began asking questions, Heidi and Jeff packed up and moved hundreds of miles away to Washington, where property was cheap and there were fewer neighbors to pry. They bought 160 acres on top of a mountain in Colville, near a national forest. Nature would be their fortress, though actually for most of the children, it would be something of a prison. The traveler was somewhere between 3 and 5 years old when his family moved into a one-room cabin in Washington. They would live there for the next 7 years without heat, plumbing, or electricity. Jeff worked as an appliance repairman, traveling 3 miles up and down the mountain each day to his shop. He would fix things for other families while barely providing for his own. He was building them a house, but doing it alone, even chopping down trees by himself, a task that would take years. Every morning before work, he would disappear into the woods to pray for hours. He was a private man, even with Heidi. Though deeply religious herself, she found his religiosity extreme. Heidi and Jeff loved their children, but also regarded them as what they sometimes called assets, sources of free labor. The children had few friends, just a small menagerie of dogs and cats. Without knowing what they really were missing, they still sensed, as children sometimes do, that they were deprived. And they never watched TV over sugary bowls of cereal, or heard pop music on the radio, or went to a movie theater, or a playground, or McDonald's. It's one thing to grow up in poverty. It's another to have all the small pleasures of childhood systematically denied. As the children learned to read, they were forced to memorize scripture. They wore hand-me-down clothes and 2 small shoes. The traveler's toes would be permanently disfigured from shoes that didn't fit. The children farmed and cleaned slop buckets and chopped firewood and babysat each other. The traveler especially emerged as a leader. In Jeff's absence, he became the man of the house. He learned how to cook and sew, how to braid his sister's hair. He would take his time with all of them, even though he longed to be outside. His siblings adored him. Every 2 years, another baby came along. The cabin got so crowded that from April to November, the traveler and his sisters would live outside in a tent. When Heidi was pregnant with her 5th child, she begged Jeff, "I can't have another baby in a tent." She needed to be in a real house. Jeff had his ever-ready reply. It was in God's hands. They grew their own vegetables and shot game. The children never saw a doctor or a dentist. No matter the ailment, bronchitis to broken bones, Heidi treated them with herbs and oils. She didn't even keep Tylenol in the house. Peppermint tea and a hot bath, she said, could cure most anything. The kids never went to an emergency room. Not long after leaving Utah, Heidi and Jeff had quit Mormonism. Neither ever explained why, but in Colville they began attending a militia-based white supremacist church called the Ark. The traveler, now around age 12, took great interest. It was around this time he befriended 2 brothers who lived half a mile away. Chevy and Shane Kehoe were close in age. They had 6 siblings, all homeschooled, all living off the grid, all belonging to the Ark. Their father was planning for a race war. The Kehoe brothers knew all about guns. This excited the traveler. He had been obsessed with guns since he was 6 years old. He began learning everything he could about the make and model of different firearms, the operating mechanisms, which ones were banned, and how to get them. He got his hands on publications like Guns and Ammo, and he got his hands on actual guns, usually by stealing them from other people. By his early teens, the traveler was breaking into homes, sometimes with a friend, like one of the Kehoe brothers. Sometimes he wouldn't even steal anything. He would just move objects around, then hide outside and watch the owners come home and panic. He would offload stolen guns at local sales or swaps. Even though he was still a child, no one ever asked for his ID. Within the family, there was one person he could be himself with, his younger sister. He would take her into the woods where they would shoot BB guns at houses. If no one came outside, they would break in. They'd start fires and scare animals. But the sister talked too much. People found out what they had been up to. So he quit letting her tag along. He more often would work alone. His behaviors escalated. At 14, he and a friend were once out in the woods when he wanted to try something new. They shot an animal, either a dog or a cat. The friend couldn't handle it. The traveler didn't understand that reaction at all. Not long after that, he verbalized his first real threat. His sister's cat kept getting into the trash. He told her, "If that cat gets into the trash again, I'm gonna kill it." One day, he grabbed the cat and set out into the woods. What happened next was brutal. Suffice it to say, he shot the animal and watched it suffer, while some of his friends looked on and became physically ill. One friend told his father. That father talked to the traveler's parents. That was pretty much the last time anyone went into the woods with him. And this was the textbook progression of a sadist and a psychopath. Torturing and killing small animals, pets especially, is experimentation in controlling and killing another living thing for pure pleasure. It's practice, the last step before graduating to humans. The traveler's mother would later insist she had no recollection of the incident with the cat. She maintained that no other parent ever told her or Jeff about it. When he was 15, the traveler began building his own cabin about a mile away from his parents. He had learned by watching and helping his father and had taken a construction job with people from the Ark. He was 16 years old when he finished and moved in alone. His mother didn't approve, but she didn't try to stop him. She thought he was too young, of course. She believed his family was a much healthier environment. But he was focused on one thing, and he needed to be alone to do it: hunting. He learned that hunting was as much about patience as marksmanship. He trained himself to go still for hours, to heighten his senses, to camouflage himself expertly. He mainly shot deer and knew how to dress and butcher the meat, which he would give to his family. But hunting for survival was no longer the point. Hunting animals was no longer the point. He would sit, hidden, and watch people for hours. He would think about how easily he could take someone out there and make them disappear. In 1994, when he was about 16, he was arrested for shoplifting. He received community service, but his parents responded more forcefully. After searching his cabin and finding stolen guns, they forced him to move back home, return the weapons, and work to repay those he'd stolen from. He found the punishment hypocritical. His parents had long encouraged him to hunt illegally because it benefited the family. Why was shoplifting treated as a moral failure when other crimes were quietly condoned? Not long after, his mother noticed a shift. During a drive down the mountain, he questioned whether any of their children would ultimately choose the life she and his father had imposed on them. To her, it sounded like rejection of their beliefs, of their sacrifices, and of God himself. Not long after, the traveler told his parents he no longer believed in organized religion. His father had already pulled away from the Ark after the 1993 siege at Waco, and the traveler thought Jeff would understand. By the time he left home in his late teens, an abrupt departure that severed contact with most of his family, the traveler had already developed the philosophy that would guide the rest of his life. He didn't want to be careless like the killers he'd read about in library books, the ones who left patterns and returned to dump sites. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to be caught. He would be patient. He would be deliberate. He would build something that lasted. He joined the military, an unexpected choice for someone raised to distrust government institutions, but a logical one from his perspective. It offered discipline, weapons training, and the ability to travel. After an honorable discharge, he returned to construction work, moving from job to job. He was skilled, reliable, and unremarkable, quiet, competent, easy to overlook. Meanwhile, he began building his other project. Each bucket contained roughly the same items: weapons, usually firearms, but sometimes knives or other implements, cash and small bills, zip ties, duct tape, contractor bags, bleach and cleaning supplies, everything sealed in plastic to prevent deterioration. Then he would go home, return to work, and act like he wasn't planning something horrifying. From the outside, he seemed to have a totally conventional life. He met a woman, they had a daughter. He kept a steady job and appeared outwardly content. People who knew him during this period would later describe him as quiet but friendly, an outdoorsman who loved hiking and camping, a dedicated father. But the kids were waiting. They were like seeds he had planted across the country, growing potential that only he could manifest. In his early 30s, he decided it was time to start harvesting. At least, that's when authorities believe his killings began. He would later claim his first murder happened in the late 1990s or early 2000s, but he never provided details investigators could verify. What investigators know for certain is that by 2011, his theoretical framework had become fully operational. His first confirmed kills came in June 2011. The methodology was elegant in its simplicity. Travel far from home, retrieve a kit, identify a target with no connection to his life, commit the crime, destroy the evidence, return the kit or dispose of it, and then go home. No digital trail linking him to the area, no eyewitnesses, no relationship to the victims. He chose victims the way another person might choose a hiking trail, based on opportunity and terrain, not emotional investment. A woman alone in a parking lot, a couple in an isolated house. It didn't matter who they were or what they looked like or how old they were. The selection criteria were purely practical: vulnerability, isolation, likelihood of quick discovery versus time to escape. The years passed. He worked construction jobs, sometimes traveling for months at a time to different states. He became a skilled carpenter and remained a reliable employee. After he split with his partner, he paid child support. He took his daughter camping. He maintained friendships, casual but consistent. Nothing about his external life suggested violence. Internally, he was refining his craft. He later described the murders as successful or unsuccessful, based purely on execution. Did he leave evidence? Was the timing optimal? Had he achieved the level of control he had wanted during the attack? If these seem heartless criteria, that's because they were. He never felt guilt or the need to offer justification. There was no moral dimension to his self-assessment. Everything was rooted in pure problem-solving. It was as though each murder was merely a test of his planning, his discipline, his ability to operate in hostile territory without detection. In 2011, he flew from his hometown to Chicago, rented a car, and drove 1,000 miles to Vermont, a part of the country where he had buried multiple kits years earlier. He retrieved one from somewhere in the woods. Then he began looking for an opportunity. On the evening of June 8th in Essex, he found what he was looking for. Bill and Lorraine Currier, a married couple living in a house with an attached garage. The layout appealed to him. He could break in through the garage without being seen from the street. He cut the phone line to test for an alarm system. Late at night, wearing a headlamp, he broke a window in the door connecting the garage to the house and entered. Bill was 50 years old. Lorraine was 55. They had been married for decades and lived quietly. Bill worked as an animal care technician at the University of Vermont. Lorraine worked in financial services at Fletcher Allen Healthcare. He chose them completely at random. They were sleeping when he came in. He bound them both with zip ties, then forced them into their car. He had already scouted an abandoned farmhouse a few miles away. That's where he took them. In the basement of that farmhouse, he tied Bill to a stool. Lorraine had been left in the car and managed to escape. He chased her down, tackled her, and dragged her back inside. He shot Bill in the basement, then he sexually assaulted and strangled Lorraine. He wrapped both bodies in garbage bags, covered them with debris in the basement, and left them there. Then he drove into New York State and disposed of at least one gun in a reservoir near Parishville. And then he vanished. Neither Bill nor Lorraine showed up for work on June 9th. Family members reported them missing. Police went to their home and found all the doors locked, but evidence suggested they hadn't left voluntarily. The phone line having been cut was one clue. The garage window being broken was another. Their car was gone, but Lorraine's glasses, which she needed to drive, were still inside the house. So were Bill's wallet and diabetes medication. The investigation yielded few leads. There were no witnesses, no obvious suspects, no clear motive. By the time the traveler was arrested in Alaska months later and confessed to the murders, the abandoned farmhouse had been demolished. The debris, along with Bill and Lorraine's bodies, had been taken to a landfill. FBI teams searched the landfill for months, but found nothing. Their bodies have never been located. The traveler logged this as a successful operation. He had entered cleanly, controlled the environment, and escaped without a trace. His methodology had worked. But something was changing. Whether it was confidence morphing into arrogance or simply the boredom that comes from the perfect execution, he did what he had vowed early on never to do. He began taking risks. The careful planning remained, but the geographic separation started to shrink. Instead of traveling thousands of miles, he began operating closer to home. In late 2011 or early 2012, the timeline is imprecise, he retrieved another kit, this one buried not across the country, but within driving distance of where he lived. He was looking for another opportunity, this time far closer to home. He had been working construction near a coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska, one of those small espresso huts common in the area, where a single employee works alone in a tiny building serving drive-through customers. There were a ton of these around town. A news columnist named Julia O'Malley once wrote that there was, quote, a coffee opportunity for every 3,300 residents in the city, end quote. Anchorage had so many coffee shops, in fact, that it was said to have the highest coffee-to-person ratio in the United States. The traveler had never been to this particular stand before. He'd never met the young woman who worked there, but he had been watching. Samantha Koenig was 18 years old, barely out of high school. She was saving money for college. She had a boyfriend and a close-knit family. None of that mattered to the traveler. What mattered was the tactical situation, a small, isolated building called Common Grounds on Tudor Road. A single employee working alone at night, minimal witnesses, a cash register with money that could provide investigators with a plausible motive, obscuring the real purpose, which was simply to kill. On the evening of February 1st, 2012, just before the stand closed for the night, he approached wearing a ski mask. He ordered a coffee. Samantha made it and handed it to him. Then he pulled out a gun and demanded money. She complied. He forced his way inside the stand and zip-tied her hands. He asked where her car was. She told him she didn't have one. Then he forced her to walk out of the coffee stand toward Tudor Road. Samantha broke away and tried to run. He chased her down and tackled her to the ground. He wrapped one arm around her and pressed the gun against her body with the other hand. He told her the gun had very quiet ammunition, so she had better cooperate. Don't make me kill you. They walked to a nearby lot where his truck was parked. He had already removed the toolboxes from the truck bed and taken off the license plates. He bound her in the truck and drove away. As he drove around town, he explained this was a kidnapping for ransom. Samantha told him he had picked a bad victim for that kind of endeavor. Her family didn't have much money. He wouldn't get much in ransom. He said he was confident her family would raise money by seeking the public's help. He convinced her that if she cooperated, she would return to her family unharmed. That seemed to calm her. She tried to talk to him and convince him to release her. At some point during the drive, he realized she didn't have her cell phone, which he needed to send ransom texts. So he drove back to Common Grounds, left her bound in the truck, went back inside the stand, and found her phone. Then he drove to another part of town and sent 2 text messages from her phone, one to her boyfriend and one to the owner of Common Grounds. The messages made it sound like she had just had a bad day and was leaving town for the weekend. Then he removed the battery from her phone. He asked for a debit card. She told him she shared a bank account with her boyfriend and that his ATM card was in the truck they shared. She gave him her address and the PIN. He took her to his property and put her in a shed in front of the house. He bound her and turned the radio up so no one could hear her if she screamed. He told her he had a police scanner and would know if she tried to alert the neighbors. Then he drove to her house to get the ATM card from the truck. While he was there, her boyfriend confronted him, yelled at him, then ran back inside to get help. The traveler ran back to his truck and fled before anyone could stop him. He drove to an ATM to test the PIN she had given him. It worked. Then he returned to the shed. He sexually assaulted Samantha, then he strangled her. The next morning, February 2nd, he left for a cruise. You heard that right. This was something he had planned for weeks, if not months. It left from New Orleans. He left Samantha's body in the shed where the sub-zero Alaskan temperatures kept it frozen. He didn't return to Anchorage until February 17th, more than 2 weeks later. Of course, Samantha's family had been sick with worry. On Sunday, February 5th, the Anchorage Daily News ran a front-page story headlined, "Barista's Father to Captors, Let Her Go." In the story, he told the kidnappers, quote, "I will give you anything in this world. I will meet you. I will give you whatever you want. Just please bring my daughter back." End quote. He had no way of knowing she had already been dead for days. The traveler had been right, though. The family, well, not well off themselves, had managed to raise some reward or ransom money through community donations. By Sunday, the amount was $12,500. But in the 2 weeks the traveler was gone, the investigation into Samantha's disappearance had gone nowhere. Surveillance video only showed an armed man in a dark hooded sweatshirt forcing Samantha away with him. Muddying the investigation was the fact that Samantha had a few months earlier filed for a protective order against a man, but that order was never approved. Because of this, Samantha's father told reporters he suspected she knew her kidnapper. Once the traveler returned to Anchorage, he began preparing his ransom demand. He went to the shed and retrieved Samantha's body. He positioned it carefully and propped it up, then used makeup and other props to make it seem like she was still alive. Then he took a Polaroid photograph as so-called proof of life. In reality, it was his own arm holding a copy of the Anchorage Daily News from February 13th. That was enough to create the illusion that Samantha had been alive on that date. He photocopied the photo. Using a manual typewriter he had bought, he typed a ransom demand for $30,000 on the back. Then he placed the note in Connor's Bog Park, tucked under a memorial flyer for a dog named Albert. Using Samantha's phone, he texted her boyfriend and said the ransom note was under Albert in Connor's Bog Park. This was a deviation from the traveler's earlier work and from his plan all along, and this was risk. He had never communicated with victims' families before, never inserted himself into an investigation. Now he was creating evidence that could be traced. In the days that followed, while still pretending Samantha was still alive, the traveler dismembered her body. He drove out to a lake, cut a hole in the ice, and dropped her remains in the water. Meanwhile, Samantha's father deposited reward money into the account connected to Samantha's ATM card. The plan was to track any withdrawals and catch whoever had taken his daughter. Sure enough, the traveler started using the card. ATM withdrawals in Anchorage, then Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Each withdrawal created a digital trail. Surveillance footage, timestamps, geographic tracking. Authorities determined the perpetrator was driving a white Ford Focus. The FBI and Texas Rangers tracked the withdrawals as they happened, watching a pattern emerge. On March 13, 2012, Corporal Brian Henry of the Texas Highway Patrol pulled over a white Ford Focus matching the description. The traveler was driving. During the traffic stop, officers obtained enough information to search the vehicle. They found Samantha's cell phone in the car. Her ATM card was in his wallet. Within hours, the traveler was taken into custody, then transported to a federal facility and placed in an interrogation room. And for the first time in his adult life, his carefully constructed control began to fracture. The interrogation stretched over weeks. Federal agents, experienced in extracting confessions from violent offenders, sat across from him in windowless rooms and asked questions. They showed him evidence, surveillance footage from ATM machines, credit card records, cell phone data. They told him they had enough not just to charge him, but to convict him. At first, he was evasive. He claimed he'd found the card and made up stories about where he had been. But the evidence was overwhelming, and he was intelligent enough to understand that denial wouldn't work. So he began to negotiate. He would tell them things, he said, but only under certain conditions. He He wanted assurances about where he would be incarcerated and how his case would be handled. He also wanted a say in what information would be made public. Like a lot of killers, he wanted to maintain control. The agents agreed to some conditions and pressed him for details. He confirmed he killed Samantha. He described the abduction and taking her to the shed. He said he kept her body frozen for days and staged that awful proof of life photo. His tone throughout his confession was remarkably flat, like he was telling a story about some incident at work or describing one of his construction projects. But then, unprompted, he began to talk about other murders. The couple in the Northeast, well, he described that crime in detail, providing information only the killer would know. The agents verified his account against evidence from the unsolved case. It matched. And he claimed there were others, many others. He said he had been killing for more than a decade across multiple states using the methodology he had developed. He described the kill kits, the burial locations, the careful planning. He said he had intentionally avoided any patterns that could connect his victims to him. The agents pressed him for specifics like names and dates, but he was selectively forthcoming. He would confirm certain details, but withhold others. Sometimes he seemed to be playing a game, offering hints, but maintaining leverage. Other times he seemed almost bored by the process, like he was annoyed at having to explain himself to people he clearly viewed as less intelligent. What emerged from these interrogations was a portrait of someone fundamentally alien to normal human psychology. He didn't express remorse for his victims. He didn't try to justify his actions with childhood trauma or mental illness or rage. When agents asked him why he killed, he struggled to articulate an answer beyond, "Because I wanted to." He described murder as something he enjoyed in the way another person might like rock climbing or woodworking, an activity that required skill and provided satisfaction. The victims themselves were irrelevant to him, interchangeable parts in an exercise that was really about his own competence. The agents kept pushing. Yes, but how many victims? Where were they buried? What were their names? They couldn't seem to get him to grasp that it mattered to those people's loved ones. He remained vague on numbers, sometimes suggesting 8 or 10, other times hinting at more. He implied there were bodies that would never be found. Whether this was truth or ego is impossible to determine. What became clear was that he had no intention of providing a complete account. Despite being in custody and facing certain conviction, he wanted to maintain some control over the narrative. Information was the only leverage he had left. Weeks into the interrogation process, he was transported to a facility to await trial. He was placed in a cell and monitored, but not under suicide watch. Nothing in his behavior suggested he was an immediate risk to himself. On December 2nd, 2012, less than a year after the Samantha Koenig abduction, correctional officers found him dead in his cell. He had used a disposable razor blade, the kind provided for shaving, flexible plastic with a small metal edge, and a bed sheet. He had cut himself deeply and methodically in multiple locations, and then he had strangled himself with the sheet using a ligature method that suggested he had planned the mechanics carefully. On the floor beneath his body, investigators found a 4-page suicide note written in pencil and ink on yellow legal pad. His blood had soaked through the pages, making them initially illegible. The FBI sent the documents to their laboratory in Virginia for processing, where they were able to restore them to mostly legible condition. The note was a disturbing piece of writing, part manifesto, part poetry, part murder fantasy. He wrote about killing with obvious pleasure, describing a victim as a pretty captive butterfly. He wrote about their, quote, nervous laugh as it burst like a pulse of blood from your throat. There will be no more laughter here, end quote. He ranted about American life, retirement homes, reality television, mindless jobs. Quote, land of the free, land of the lie, land of the scheme, Americanize, end quote. He wrote as a repeating refrain, consume what you don't need, stars you idolize, pursue what you admit is a dream, then it's American die. The FBI analyzed the writings extensively, looking for hidden codes or messages, searching for clues about other victims. They found nothing useful. The note offered no investigative leads that could help identify or locate further victims. Even in death, he was withholding information, maintaining control in the only way he still could. His suicide effectively ended the investigation into his other crimes. Without his cooperation, law enforcement was left with fragmentary information. They could confirm 2 murders definitively, the young woman from the coffee stand and the couple in the Northeast. They strongly suspected others based on his statements, but they couldn't identify victims or connect him to specific unsolved cases. Some of the kill kits he had described were found, but not all of them. They surely remain buried wherever he left them, their contents slowly deteriorating. Families of those who vanished during the years he was active have wondered if their loved ones were among his victims. Investigators have tried to match his travel patterns to unsolved disappearances and murders across the country. Some potential connections have been identified, but without definitive proof. What makes them particularly haunting isn't the body count, whatever that true number might be. It's the methodology itself, that someone could kill repeatedly across a vast geographic area, leaving almost no connectable pattern, evading detection for years. He proved that the modern forensic and investigative tools that have revolutionized law enforcement all have limitations. They rely on patterns. They need killers to reveal themselves through mistakes or inconsistencies. Granted, that is what ultimately tripped him up, but for a long time, it didn't. If someone has no pattern, our existing tools break down. His case forced law enforcement to confront an uncomfortable truth. The systems designed to catch serial killers assume those killers want something beyond the murders themselves. They assume there's a psychological signature to decode, a preference to identify, a cooling-off period to map. He wanted nothing beyond the act, and that made him almost invisible. Now, who was this man we've called the Traveler? His real name was Israel Keyes. He was born in 1978 in Cove, Utah. He died by his own hand in 2012 in an Anchorage jail cell at age 34. The construction worker and the killer, the father and the predator, the helpful co-worker and the man who buried murder kits in forests across America. In the end, he controlled the one thing he had always been most concerned about, his own narrative. By killing himself before trial, he ensured that the full story would never be known. Even in death, Keyes remained the traveler, moving through the landscape of American crime, leaving only fragments behind, his true path visible to no one but himself. To research this case, I relied on official statements from the FBI, Vermont State Police, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Alaska, as well as contemporary news coverage from the Anchorage Daily News, ABC News, CBS News, and other publications. Details about Keyes' childhood and family background come from Maureen Callahan's book, American Predator: The Hunt for the Most Meticulous Serial Killer of the 21st Century, which includes interviews with Keyes' mother and access to FBI psychological evaluations. The Catalyst is a production of Grab Bag Collab, a division of Just Us Media. It's written and narrated by me, Amber Hunt, and edited, engineered, and produced by Amanda Rossman.